history is not what happened, it is what was written. And what was written is always missing something. They tell you the Vikings were made in fire and iron. They show you the axe, the ship, the scream of the surf. But a people do not begin as warriors. They begin as a breath in the dark. Here is the first glitch. Before the raid, before the saga, before the long ship cut the sea like a blade, there is a longhouse, there is smoke, there is straw. There is a woman gripping the edge of the world with both hands, trying to bring another human across. And if you want to understand them, really understand them, you do not start with battle. You start with the cradle. Because the cradle is where the law is born. The clan,
the debt, the prayer, the invisible arithmetic of survival. So ask yourself this: what kind of childhood produces a man who believes the ocean is a road? A man who thinks fate is not a metaphor, but a rope already tied around his waist? What kind of bedtime story makes a child sleep beside a knife? Let's begin where all myths begin. In a room too small for pain, in a world too cold for mercy. A Viking birth was not a clean event. It was not quiet. It was not private. It belonged to the household the way winter belonged to the land. The longhouse held everyone, the old, the young, the sick, the hungry, animals too sometimes, because heat was a currency, and nothing was wasted.
Smoke ran along the rafters like a second ceiling. The walls were timber and turf. The floor was earth. And outside, there was wind that did not care about your prayers. When labor came, it came like weather. It arrived whether you were ready or not. There were women who knew what to do. Midwives, older kids, neighbors with hands that had done this before. They boiled water. They laid cloth.
Because they lived with uncertainty, the way we live with electricity, always present, always humming, always capable of killing you. They used charms, small objects worn close, a bead, a carved piece of bone, a hammer of Thor on a thong of leather. They spoke names before the child had one, as if naming it early could pull it toward life. They kept the fire fed. They kept the door watched.
Took place while someone else, 10 feet away, might be mending a net, or sharpening a blade, or eating.
But you did not ask for comfort. You asked for the truth. Not every child was raised. Exposure, leaving a newborn out, appears in sources and laws across the broader Germanic world, and the Norse were not immune to that darkness. It was not constant, it was not casual, but it was possible. And that possibility shaped everything. It meant that to be accepted was to be chosen. Not by fate, by people, by the cold mathematics of the household. So if you are listening right now thinking, they were monsters, remember what monsters we become when survival is the only religion left. But most children were accepted. Most births ended with a small, wet sound. cry that meant lungs had decided to join the living.
And then came another ritual, quieter, almost tender. Water. In later Christian Scandinavia, baptism becomes the formal ceremony. But even before that, there are references to a kind of water sprinkling and naming custom. Water and a name as a threshold. A child without a name was not fully inside the social world. A child with a name had a place in the web of kin. Names mattered, not like fashion. Like inheritance.
You think a cradle is a soft thing. In a Viking house, a cradle was often wood, practical, sometimes suspended, sometimes set near the sleeping platform. It sat where the warmth was, where the smoke was not too thick, where someone could reach the child without getting up. The baby was swaddled, wrapped tight, not because they wanted to imprison it, because warmth and stillness kept small bodies alive. And while the child slept, the world instructed it, not with lessons, with rhythm. The creak of timber, the hiss of fat in a pan, the scrape of a whetstone, the mutter of adults talking about weather, livestock, law, and someone's insult from 3 summers ago. Because insult was not small in that world. Insult was a seed, and a seed can become a feud.
And a feud can become smoke on the horizon. So even in infancy, the child was learning the true geography of Viking life. Not maps, not borders. Relationships. Who owes whom? Who shamed whom? Who can be trusted? Who cannot? The adults might speak low when they talked about it, but children are not deaf. They are instruments. They pick up the vibration of danger long before they understand the words for it. Now imagine the first years. A Viking toddler did not grow up in a nursery. It grew up in the center of production. The household was a machine, not a metaphor, a literal machine of food and cloth and survival. Women spun wool, wove cloth, cooked, managed stores. Men worked fields, tended animals, fished, hunted, built, traded.
Children were not spectators. Children were the next set of hands. As soon as a child could walk, it could carry. As soon as it could talk, it could be sent. As soon as it could understand, it could be corrected. And correction was not always gentle. This is another glitch in our modern fantasy. We like to imagine the past as a costume party. But childhood then was brief. Not because they hated children, because time was expensive. A child learned quickly because a child who learned slowly could die. But do not confuse hardness with absence of love. The sagas and poems that survive are full of grief for children lost, full of pride in sons and daughters, full of the knowledge that a family line is a fragile thing. They played with their children. They told stories.
They laughed. They also demanded. Because the world demanded first. Here is a hook you can hold on to. A Viking child was born into a story before it was born into a self. Because that culture carried its memory in the mouth. They did not have books the way we do. They had voices. They had poems that could survive winter. They had sagas that could outlast a man's bones. A child heard names like Odin and Thor and Freya. Not as fiction, but as weather in the mind. Powers. Forces. Explanations for the unexplainable. They heard about giants and wolves and the end of the world. Not because adults wanted to scare them, but because Ragnarok, doom, was a model of reality. In their worldview, the world ends. The gods die.
And still you stand up in the morning and do what must be done. Tell me that is not a philosophy. Tell me that does not shape a spine. And here is the more human version. A child heard the family's own legends, the grandfather who sailed and came back with silver, the uncle who lost an eye and gained a reputation, the feud that began with a joke and ended with a funeral. And when the child asked why, the answers were never simple. Because honor is not simple. Because shame is not simple. Because a man's name could be worth more than his life. So the child absorbed a truth early. Your identity is not inside you. It is between you and everyone else. Daily life had textures we rarely imagine. Food was not constant. Some days there was plenty: meat, fish, porridge, bread, dairy. Some days there was thin soup and patience. A child learned what hunger feels like without drama. It was just another season, another mood of the body. Clothing was wool and linen, layered, patched, handed down. A child wore what existed, not what was cute. Sleep happened where it could. On platforms along the walls, sometimes with animals nearby, warmth shared like a secret. Privacy was a luxury. Silence, too. And yet children found ways to be children. They played. Small wooden boats in water troughs, knucklebones, wrestling, running, throwing stones at posts, pretending. And what did they pretend? They pretended the world they were watching. They pretended to row, to hunt, to bargain, to fight. A toy sword is never just a toy. It is an apprenticeship. Now let's talk about something that will modern listeners lean forward. Fosterage. In parts of the Norse world, children, especially from prominent families, might be fostered out to another household. Not because parents didn't want them, because alliances are stronger than affection when a society is built on kin and obligation. A child raised in another home becomes a living bond, a guarantee, a hostage with a smile, a bridge. And when that child grows,
It has two loyalties braided together. Two fathers, in a sense. Two houses in its blood. That is sophisticated politics, disguised as family. That is the Viking mind, in plain clothes.
Even childhood is strategy, and not all children stood on equal ground. There were free children, and there were thralls, enslaved people, whose children inherited that status. A thrall child worked early, harder, with fewer protections. Its life belonged to another household. It might still laugh, still play, still learn, but the ceiling above it was lower. This is important because Viking daily life was not one life. It was layered. One child grows hearing that their name matters. Another grows hearing that their name can be changed by someone else. Same smoke, same winter, different destiny. And destiny in the Norse world is never a soft word. Now the body. By the time a Viking child was 7 or 8, it was useful. By 12, it was close to adult expectations. In some contexts, adolescence could bring legal and social responsibilities. You were not sheltered for long. A boy learned tools. A knife, first for chores, later for protection. A bow, maybe. A net. A spear if the household could afford it, and the world required it. He learned to row. He learned to endure cold water without panic. He learned to keep his mouth shut when older men talked. A girl learned the engine of the home. Textiles especially, spinning, weaving, were not domestic trivia. They were wealth. Cloth could be traded, stored, counted. A household that could make cloth could survive. She learned food and storage, and the invisible architecture of daily life. She learned how to manage people, how to keep accounts in her head.
How to measure out winter so winter did not win. And if you think that is small, you do not understand power. A home is an empire measured in bowls. But do not lock them into stereotypes too quickly. Women in Norse society could hold property in some contexts, could initiate divorce in some contexts, could run farms, could be central figures in feuds and settlements. Men could be tender, could sing, could compose poetry, could weep at funerals. The sagas are full of sharp women and complicated men. So the child grew up with roles, yes, but also with exceptions that prove the world was real, not a cartoon. Literacy. Most Viking Age people were not literate in the modern sense, but runes existed. Short inscriptions.
Markings. Names. Ownership. Memory carved into wood. Bone. Stone. A child might watch an older hand carve marks and feel the strange power of it. That a sound can be trapped. That a name can be nailed to the world. And then there is the deeper literacy. The one that matters more. A Viking child learned to read people. To read weather. To read silence at a table. To read the way a man sets down his cup. Because in a society where law is spoken, where courts are assemblies, where reputation is currency, your survival depends on interpreting signals. That is why the Viking world produces characters who feel modern in their psychological clarity. They are always calculating, always watching, always measuring the room, even when they are smiling, especially when they are smiling.
Now, a story inside the story. Picture a boy, has no name yet, or maybe too many. He is small, barefoot on packed earth. He is watching an older man repair a boat plank. The man's hands are scarred in a way that suggests time is not gentle. The boy asks nothing. He just watches. He learns where strength lives, not in shouting, in patience, in doing the same motion until it becomes perfect. That boy will grow up thinking of the sea as a door. He will grow up thinking of wood as something alive. He will grow up believing that a mistake is not a lesson. It is a threat. Because if a boat fails, the ocean does not forgive. And that is the point. Viking childhood taught competence the way modern life teaches convenience. The world is not here to help you.
So you become someone who can help yourself. This is not brutality. This is adaptation. Now picture a girl near the hearth. She is turning wool between her fingers, copying the motion of an older woman. Her hands are small and clumsy. She fails and fails. The older woman does not praise her for trying. She corrects her. Again, again, again. Because if the thread breaks, the cloth weakens. If the cloth weakens, the winter bites through. If the winter bites through, someone coughs. If someone coughs, someone else might bury them by spring.
A baby held against a chest while a storm hits the roof. A small hand gripping a thumb. A lullaby, not sweet like modern lullabies, but steady. A song that says the world is hard and you are not alone in it. They celebrated milestones quietly. The first time a child walks without falling. The first time it says a word that sounds like a name. The first time it brings something useful without being asked. Pride was not loud. It was a nod, a look, a place at the fire a little closer in. And grief. Grief was everywhere. A child sick in winter. A small body that stops breathing. A mother who goes still. A father who stares at the wall. Because there is nothing he can threaten. Nothing he can bargain with. And then the household keeps moving. Because it must.
Here is the hook that matters most. When you listen to Viking sagas, you hear men speaking as if fate is written, as if the end is known. That is not just poetry. It is the worldview you get when you watch life begin and end in the same room. when you learn as a child that survival is never guaranteed, when the boundary between cradle and grave is thin as cloth. So the Viking child grows with a strange calm, not because it is fearless, because it has already accepted what modern people spend their whole lives trying to deny, that the world can take everything, and still you live, still you work, still you tell the story. And now, the oracle's question.
What did we rewrite them when we rewrote them? We turned them into pure violence because it sells. We make them a mask for modern fantasies, freedom, rage, masculinity, rebellion. We forgot the daily arithmetic, the wool, the porridge, the winter stores, the fear of a cough, the politics of fosterage, the miracle of a child surviving long enough to be annoying. Not the one that raided a monastery, brought a father home, or didn't. We forgot that the first battlefield a Viking ever faced was the household itself, and the enemy was hunger, and cold, and time. So when you picture a Viking child, do not picture a miniature warrior. Picture a small human, learning the rules of a world that does not pretend.
A world where names are contracts, where stories are weapons, where love looks like preparation. History is not what happened, it is what was written. We rewrite it to reveal the glitch. And the glitch is this. The Vikings were not born on ships. They were born by the fire. And the fire was where the first saga began.